Blood hit the floor before the doors even stopped swinging. 3 men in tactical gear, half carried, half dragged a fourth through the emergency entrance of Riverside General in Ashton Grove, Montana. The wounded man, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, wearing what was left of a naval uniform, had a chest wound that wasn't behaving like anything the night shift had seen before. His face was gray, his breathing came in short, wet gasps, and when the blonde nurse in oversized scrubs moved toward him with her hands raised to help, he shoved her back hard enough that she stumbled. "Get thee away from me," he rasped. "I need a real doctor." She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, just stepped back into the shadows while the room erupted into chaos around a man who had seconds, maybe minutes, before his lungs gave out completely. Nobody knew it yet, but he just rejected the only person in that building who could save his life. Before we go any further, stick with me until the end of this story. If you want to see how far these tales travel, drop a comment with your city below and hit that like button. Let's see where in the world you're watching from. The emergency room at Riverside General smelled like disinfectant, burnt coffee, and something darker that never quite washed out of the floors. It was a level 2 trauma center in a town that didn't see much action until tonight, when violence walked through the door in tactical boots and brought the kind of trouble that didn't belong in Montana. Sarah Brennan had been a nurse here for 8 months, 29 years old, pale skin, gray eyes that didn't give much away, and a habit of keeping her head down. She worked the graveyard shift because nobody else wanted it, took the assignments nobody else asked for, and stayed quiet when the doctors talked over her. Most of the staff didn't know much about her. Former military, someone said once. Discharged for reasons nobody cared to dig into. She wore scrubs 2 sizes too big, kept her hair tied back in a knot that looked like an afterthought, and never caused problems. Tonight, she'd been restocking a supply cabinet when the doors exploded inward. The man they carried in wasn't just injured, he was dying in a specific way. The kind of way that came with a timer you couldn't see but could hear ticking if you knew what to listen for. Sarah knew. She'd heard of Belor, in places where the lights didn't work and the supplies ran out, and you made decisions that stayed with you long.
After the blood dried, she moved toward him on instinct. That's when he pushed her. I said, "Back off." His voice was a ragged snarl, half breath and half threat. I need someone who knows what they're doing. One of the tactical operators, late 20s, built like he lived in a gym, wearing black fatigues with no unit insignia, grabbed her arm and pulled her further back. Not rough, but not gentle either. "Ma'am, step away." Sarah stepped away. Dr. Marcus Calloway came through the double doors like he always did, fast, loud, and ready to be the most important person in the room. He was 42, silver at the temples, with the kind of confidence that came from a career spent being right, just often enough to never question himself. He saw the wounded man, saw the operators, and his eyes went sharp. "What happened?" "Gunshot wound, upper left thorax," one of the operators said. His voice was flat, professional, stripped of anything that wasn't information. "Entry wound below the clavicle, no exit. Happened approximately 40 minutes ago. He's been deteriorating for the last 10. Calloway didn't waste time. "Get him on the table." "Someone page surgery. I want x-ray down here now, and 2 units of O-neck standing by." The team moved. Sarah stayed where she was, just outside the light watching. They lifted the wounded man, Commander Jacob Pierce, though she didn't know his name yet, onto the trauma bay table. His uniform was soaked through. The entry wound was small, clean, but the way his chest moved wasn't right. Asymmetrical, one side lagging behind the other. Calloway leaned in, fingers probing the wound site. "Pulses trying, BP's dropping, respiratory rates climbing. Get me a chest tube kit." Sarah's hands twitched. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Tube's not gonna help." The words came out quieter than she meant them to. Calloway didn't even look up. "Excuse me?" "The bullet's still in there," Sarah said. "It's not a hemothorax. It's a tension pneumo. If you try to tube him without decompressing first." "I didn't ask for your opinion, Brennan." Calloway's tone could have frozen water. "You're a nurse. Do your job and let me do mine." One of the operators glanced at her, just for a second, then his attention snapped back to Pierce. Sarah shut her mouth and stayed quiet. Calloway worked fast. He was good at what he did. She'd give him that much.
But he was working off the wrong assumption, and in a trauma bay, wrong assumptions killed people faster than bullets did. Pierce's oxygen saturation dropped. 92, 90, 87. "He's desaving," one of the nurses called out. "I can see that. Calloway's voice was tight now. "Get the tube in now." They prepped the insertion site. Calloway positioned the trocar, and Sarah watched the monitors, counting seconds, knowing exactly what was about to happen and unable to stop it. Pierce's hand shot out and grabbed Calloway's wrist. His grip was weak, shaking, but his eyes were sharp. "You put that thing in me, and I'm done. Commander, I'm telling you, it's not going to work." Pierce's breath hitched. "Something's wrong. It's not bleeding. It's pressure." Calloway pulled his hand free. "Sir, I understand you are in pain, but I need you to trust me. I don't trust anyone." Pierce's gaze slid past Calloway, past the nurses, and landed on Sarah. His expression twisted into something ugly, especially not her. Sarah felt the words land, but didn't react. She'd heard worse. The monitors started screaming. Pierce's oxygen saturation hit 82. His lips were turning blue. His good lung was working overtime, but it couldn't compensate for the one that was collapsing under pressure that had nowhere to go. "Damn it!" Calloway stepped back. "Get me the crash cart. If his pressure drops any further, we are going to lose him." Sarah couldn't stay quiet anymore. "You're losing him now." Calloway spun on her. "What did I tell you? You told me to stay out of it." Sarah's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. "And if you keep going the way you're going, he'll be dead in 3 minutes." One of the operators turned toward her, the one who'd pulled her back earlier. He was watching her now with a different kind of attention. "You think you know better than a trauma surgeon." Calloway's tone was acid. "I know a tension pleurothorax when I see one." Sarah met his eyes. "And I know needle decompussion needs to happen before anything else, or the pressure is going to stop his heart." "That's exactly what I'm—" "No," Sarah shook her head. "You're trying to stabilize vitals first. That's textbook. But textbook doesn't account for a bullet fragment sitting against the pleural cavity and creating a one-way valve. Every breath he takes is trapping more air. You don't vent that pressure. His mediastinum shifts, his vena cava collapses, and he's gone." The room had gone quiet.
Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Calloway stared at her. "How would you even know?" "Because I've seen it before." Sarah's jaw tightened. In places where if you guessed wrong, people died, and there was nobody coming to fix it. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, Pierce coughed. Wet, desperate, and blood flecked his lips. The operator who'd been watching Sarah stepped forward. "Do it." Calloway turned. "Excuse me?" "Do what she said." The operator's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Needle decompression. Now, I'm not taking orders from you, or if you want him to live." The operator didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He's my commanding officer, and if she says that's what saves him, that's what you're going to do. Calloway's face went red, but he looked at the monitors, looked at Pice's deteriorating stats, and made the calculation. "Fine." He turned to one of the nurses. "Get me a 14-gauge catheter." Sarah didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Calloway positioned the needle at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. His hands were steady. He wasn't an idiot, but he wasn't incompetent. The needle went in clean, and the moment it breached the pleural space, there was a hiss of escaping air, loud, unmistakable, and immediate. Pice gasped. A real breath this time. His oxygen saturation started climbing. 85, 88, 91. The room exhaled. Calloway pulled the needle, secured the catheter, and stepped back. He didn't look at Sarah. Pice's eyes opened. He was still gray, still shaking, but he was breathing, and he was staring at her. "You," he said. Sarah didn't answer. "You knew?" "Yeah. How?" She didn't owe him an explanation, didn't owe any of them anything, but the way he was looking at her now, like he was seeing her for the first time, made her tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. "Because I used to do this for a living," she said. One of the other operators, older than the first, turned his head slightly. "Do what for a living?" Sarah pulled up her left sleeve. The tattoo was small, black ink, and specific, an eagle, a caduceus, and beneath it, a unit designation that didn't exist in any official database anymore. The older operator saw it. His posture changed instantly, spine straightening, shoulders squaring. He didn't salute, not in a civilian hospital, but his hand moved like he wanted to. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you served with the 42nd. It wasn't a question." Sarah let her sleeve drop.
Long time ago. The younger operator was staring now, too. The 42nd Combat Medical. That's classified. Was classified, Sarah corrected. It doesn't exist anymore. Pierce was still watching her, his expression unreadable. "You were a combat medic. I was a lot of things. And now you're here. His voice was rough, but the contempt was gone. Working graveyard shifts in Montana seemed like a good place to disappear. Calloway, who'd been standing in stunned silence, finally found his voice. "You're military?" Sarah turned to him. "I was." "And you didn't think that was worth mentioning? Didn't think it mattered?" She looked at Pierce. "Apparently it does now." Pierce coughed again, but it was clearer this time, stronger. "You saved my life. I did my job. After I told you to back off." "Yeah, after I called you I heard what you called me." Sarah's voice stayed level. "Doesn't change the medicine." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the older operator stepped forward, positioned himself in front of Sarah, and did what he'd wanted to do since he saw the tattoo. He saluted. The younger one followed a heartbeat later. Sarah didn't return it. She wasn't active duty anymore, hadn't been for 3 years, but she stood there and let them see her. Really see her. For the first time since they'd crashed through those doors. Calloway looked like he'd been slapped. "What the hell is going on?" The older operator didn't lower his hand. "This woman saved lives in places you've never heard of, Doc. She's earned a hell of a lot more respect than you've been giving her." "I didn't." "You dismissed her." The operator's tone was flat, factual. "You told her to stay out of it, and if we'd listened to you instead of her, Commander Pierce would be dead right now." Calloway opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at Sarah, and whatever he saw on her face made him take a step back. Sarah turned to Pierce. "You're stable for now, but you're not out of the woods. That bullet's still in you, and it needs to come out before it moves or fragments. You need a CT scan and a surgical consult within the next 30 minutes. Pierce nodded slowly. "You going to be there?" "I'm a floor nurse, Commander. Surgery is not my department." "Then make it your department." She almost smiled. "Doesn't work like that." "It does if I say it does." Pierce's eyes were clearer now, focused. "You're staying with me until I'm out of this building or out of the woods, whichever comes first."
Sarah glanced at Calloway, who looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't quite have the spine for it anymore. "Fine," she said, "but if you push me again, I'm letting Calloway finish the job." Pierce's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. "Deal, and be done." 2 hours later, Sarah stood outside the surgical suite while a trauma team worked to extract the bullet fragment from Pierce's chest cavity. The CT had confirmed what she'd suspected. The round had tumbled on impact, fragmented, and one piece had lodged itself in a position that made bleeding less of a threat than pressure buildup. Textbook tension pneumothorax, complicated by a foreign object that didn't show up clearly on initial imaging. Calloway had tried to scrub in. The head of surgery had politely but firmly told him to step back and let the specialist handle it. Sarah sat in a plastic chair that was bolted to the wall and drank coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. The 2 operators, she'd learned their names were Mason and Torres, stood nearby, silent and watchful. They hadn't left since Pierce had been wheeled in. "You really served with the 42nd? Torres asked eventually. Sarah nodded. "I heard stories," he said. "Never met anyone who actually ran with them. Not many of us left. Mason, the older one, studied her." "What happened to the unit? To you?" Sarah took another sip of coffee. It didn't taste any better. "Got out, came home, tried to be normal." "How's that working?" "You saw how it's working." Mason almost smiled. "Yeah, I did." The surgical suite doors opened. A doctor and blood-stained scrub stepped out, pulling down her mask. She looked tired but satisfied. "He's stable," she said. "Bullets out, no major vascular damage. He got lucky." "He got good medical intervention," Mason corrected. The doctor's gaze shifted to Sarah. "You the one who called the pneumothorax?" "Yeah. Saved his life. If they tried to tube him without decompressing first, the pressure shift would have stopped his heart." She stripped off her gloves. "Nice catch." Sarah didn't respond. The doctor headed down the hall, and Sarah stood up to follow. "Where are you going?" Torres asked. "Back to work. My shift's not over." "You're not going to wait for..." "What? For him to wake up?" Sarah shook her head. "He's alive. That's all that matters." She made it 3 steps before Mason called after her. "Brennan." She stopped, turned. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once and walked away. Sarah made it back to the ER just in time to see
2 men in suits stepped through the entrance. They didn't walk like doctors, didn't walk like patients. They walked like federal agents, and the way they scanned the room confirmed it.
She felt something cold settle into her stomach. One of them approached the front desk. The night receptionist, Kelly, 22 and perpetually exhausted, looked up with the kind of customer service smile that came from years of dealing with people at their worst. "Can I help you?" The agent pulled out a badge. "FBI. We're here regarding a patient who was brought in earlier tonight, Commander Jacob Pierce." Kelly's smile faltered. I'd need to check with... We don't need permission." The agent's tone wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either. "This is a federal matter. We need to see him immediately." Sarah moved closer, staying in the periphery. The second agent noticed her. His eyes tracked her for a moment before dismissing her as irrelevant. "Commander Pierce is in post-op recovery," Kelly said carefully. "He's not conscious yet." "Then we'll wait in his room." "I don't think it's not a request." Sarah stepped forward. "He's in a sterile recovery environment. No visitors until the surgical team clears him." Both agents turned toward her. "And you are?" the first one asked. "The nurse who kept him alive long enough to get into surgery." The agent's expression didn't change. "We appreciate that. But this is a matter of national security, and we need access to Commander Pierce immediately. Then you'll need to wait until he's stable enough for visitors." Sarah's voice stayed calm. "Hospital policy. Federal authority supersedes hospital policy. Not when it comes to patient care." Sarah didn't blink. "You want to see him. You go through the proper channels. You don't get to walk in here and demand access to a critical post-op patient just because you have a badge." The second agent stepped closer. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand it fine." Sarah met his eyes. "What I don't understand is why 2 federal agents are this interested in a man who got shot 40 minutes outside of town and hasn't been conscious long enough to tell anyone what happened." The first agent's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern." "It is when you're trying to get into my patient's room." The silence stretched out. Kelly was staring at Sarah like she'd grown a second head. Nobody talked to federal agents like that. Nobody
Wanted to keep their job anyway. The first agent pulled out his phone. "We'll be back with a proper authorization, but make no mistake, we will see Commander Pierce tonight." "Looking forward to it," Sarah said. They left. Kelly waited until the doors closed before turning to Sarah. "Are you insane?" "Probably. They're gonna come back with a warrant or a court order or something." "Yeah. And then what?" Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving toward the surgical wing, her mind working through a problem she didn't fully understand yet, but could feel taking shape. Something was wrong. Federal agents didn't show up in the middle of the night for a routine gunshot victim. They didn't push this hard, this fast, unless there was something they needed to control or someone they needed to silence. She found Mason and Torres outside the recovery room. "We've got a problem," she said. Mason straightened. "What kind?" "FBI just tried to get access to Pierce. I bought some time, but they're coming back." Torres swore under his breath. Mason's expression went flat and dangerous. "Did they say why?" Mason asked. "National security, which means exactly nothing and everything at the same time." Mason pulled out his phone, stepped away, and made a call that lasted less than 30 seconds. When he came back, his face was grim. "Pierce was investigating something when he got hit," he said quietly. "Something internal. He didn't tell us what, just that it was bad enough that he didn't trust standard communication channels." Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. "And now someone wants to make sure he doesn't talk. That's what I'm thinking. How long until he wakes up?" "Doctor said maybe an hour, maybe 2. "And how long until those agents come back?" "Less than that." Sarah looked at the door to the recovery room, then back at Mason. "You trust your chain of command?" "Some of it." "That's not good enough." She pulled out her own phone, old, battered, with a contact list that hadn't been updated in 3 years. "I know someone who can make calls that actually matter, but I need time." "How much?" 12 hours, maybe more." Mason glanced at Torres, who nodded once. "Do it," Mason said. Sarah dialed a number she'd promised herself she'd never use again. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, rough, tired, and carrying the weight of too many years in too many bad places. "Brennan, it's been a while. I need a favor, Colonel." There was a pause.
Be serious if you're calling me. It is talk.
Sarah kept it brief. The wounded commander, the suspicious federal response, the feeling that something much bigger was moving in the dark. When she finished, the colonel was quiet for a long moment. "You're sure about this?" he asked finally. "No," Sarah admitted. "But I'm sure enough." "All right. Give me 6 hours. I'll make some calls. But Brennan, if this goes sideways, you're exposed. You understand that?" "I understand." "Good. Stay sharp." The line went dead. Sarah lowered her phone and looked at Mason. "It's done. What happens now?" "Now we wait, and we make damn sure nobody gets to Pierce before he wakes up." Torres checked his sidearm. "Subtle. Practiced. We can handle that." Sarah believed him. She went back to the ER, finished the last 2 hours of her shift like nothing had happened, and clocked out at 6 in the morning. The sun was just starting to break over the mountains, turning the sky the color of old bruises. She should have gone home, should have slept. Instead, she went back upstairs to the recovery wing and found Mason standing guard outside Pierce's room. "He awake?" she asked. "Just barely. Asking for you." Sarah pushed open the door. Pierce was propped up in bed, pale and exhausted, but conscious. His eyes tracked her as she entered. "You're still here," he said. "Apparently." "Why?" Sarah pulled a chair over and sat down. "Because 2 federal agents tried to get into your room 3 hours ago, and I have a bad feeling about why." Pierce's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or confirmation. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "Nothing. Because I don't know anything." She leaned forward. "But I'm getting the sense that I'm about to." Pierce was quiet for a long time. Then he exhaled slowly, wincing at the pain it caused. "I was tracking a leak," he said. "Someone inside the Navy. Someone high enough to bury evidence and manipulate reports. I got close. Too close. And someone decided to shut me down before I could finish. The ambush. Yeah. And now they're trying to finish the job. That's my guess." Sarah sat back. "So what do we do?" Pierce raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to. I'm already in it." Sarah interrupted. "The second I blocked those agents, I made myself part of this. So either tell me what I need to know, or I walk out right now and let them have you." Pierce studied her. "You do that."
No, Sarah admitted, but I'm trying to give you an out. He almost smiled. I don't want an out. I want to know who tried to kill me and make sure they don't get away with it. Then we're on the same page. Good. Pierce shifted in the bed, grimacing. Because this gets worse before it gets better. How much worse? The leak I was tracking, it goes back years, and it's connected to something that got buried a long time ago. Something involving a classified medical unit that operated in places nobody wants to talk about. Sarah went very still. Pierce saw it. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? She didn't answer right away. Couldn't, because she knew exactly what he was talking about.
And the fact that it was resurfacing now after 3 years of silence meant that the past she'd buried in Montana wasn't buried deep enough. "Yeah," she said. "Finally." "I know." Pierce's gaze sharpened. "Then you know how bad this is." "I do. And you're still here. I'm still here." He nodded slowly. "All right then, here's what we're going to do." Outside the room, Mason's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and his face went hard. He knocked once on the door and stepped inside. "We've got movement," he said. 3 black SUVs just pulled into the parking lot, federal plates, and they're not alone. Sarah stood. How many? At least 6 agents, maybe more. Pice tried to sit up further and failed. They're not here to ask questions. No, Mason agreed. They're not. Sarah looked at Pierce, then at Mason, and made a decision she knew she couldn't take back. How long can you hold them off? Mason's expression was grim. Not long enough. Then we don't hold them off. Sarah pulled out her phone again. We make them irrelevant. She dialed the colonel's number. He answered on the first ring.
Tell me you've got something, she said. I've got something, the colonel replied. But you're not going to like it. Try me. The leak Pierce was tracking, it connects to an operation you were part of, Sierra 7, the one that got erased. Sarah's blood went cold. That's not possible. Sierra 7 was classified above. It was, the colonel interrupted, until someone declassified it 6 months ago, quietly, just enough to start pulling threads. And now those threads are leading back to people who don't want to be found. Who declassified it? That's the question, isn't it? The colonel's voice was grim. But whoever it was, they just painted a target on everyone who survived that operation, including you. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. What do I do? You stay alive long enough for me to get the right people involved. I'm calling in favors, Brennan. Big ones. But it's going to take time. How much? 12 hours. Maybe less. We don't have 12 hours. Then make them. The colonel paused. And Brennan, whatever happens, don't let them take Pierce. If he disappears into federal custody, he's gone. Understand? I understand. The line went dead. Sarah turned to Mason. We need to move him. Move him where? Anywhere that isn't here. Pierce shook his head. I can't walk. Hell, I can barely breathe without feeling like I'm being stabbed. Then we'll carry you. That's insane. You have a better idea.
He didn't. Sarah looked at Mason. You have a vehicle? Transport van 2 blocks away. Get it now. Mason didn't argue. He was gone before Sarah finished speaking. Torres stepped into the room, his expression tense. They're in the building. 3 agents just went through the main entrance. The others are covering the exits. Sarah moved fast. She disconnected Pierce's IV, capped the line, and started unhooking monitors. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they figure out where we are. This is a terrible plan, Pierce said. You're welcome to stay and see how the alternative works out. He didn't argue after that. Torres helped Sarah get Pierce into a wheelchair. It wasn't easy. Every movement made Pierce's face go white, but they managed. Back stairwell, Torres said. It's the only route they won't be watching yet. They moved. The hallway was empty, the early morning shift just starting to filter in. Sarah pushed the wheelchair as fast as she dared, while Torres led the way, his hand resting on the concealed weapon at his hip. They made it to the stairwell. Behind them, voices echoed down the corridor. Official. Urgent. They're here, Pierce said, quietly. I know. Sarah kept moving. They descended 2 flights before the door above them crashed open. Federal agents, stop where you are. Torres turned, his weapon out now. Keep going. Sarah didn't hesitate. She kept pushing, kept moving, and tried not to think about how badly this could end. They hit the ground floor. Mason was waiting with the van. Engine running, back doors open. They loaded Pierce in seconds. Sarah climbed in after him. Torres followed. The van pulled away, just as 3 agents burst through the hospital side exit. Mason drove fast, but not recklessly, weaving through morning traffic like he'd done this before. Where are we going? Pierce asked through gritted teeth. Somewhere safe? Sarah said. Does that place exist? We're about to find out. But the safe house was 40 miles outside Ashton Grove, tucked into a valley that didn't appear on most maps. It belonged to a friend of the colonel's, someone who owed favors and didn't ask questions. They got Pierce inside, got him stable, and Sarah finally let herself breathe. Mason stood by the window watching the road. Torres checked the perimeter, and Pierce lay on a couch that had seen better days, looking like death, but still conscious. So what now? He asked. Sarah sat down across from him. Now we wait for the colonel to do what he does best. Which
is make powerful people very uncomfortable. Pierce's mouth twitched. Sounds like my kind of guy. He is. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the valley stayed quiet. Sarah's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She answered. Yeah, Brennan. The voice was unfamiliar. Cold. You've made a serious mistake. Who is this? Someone who's giving you one chance to walk away. Bring Commander Pierce back to Riverside General. Do it within the next hour and we'll forget this ever happened. And if I don't, then you become part of the problem we're solving. The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone. Pierce was watching her. Let me guess. Threat? Yeah? You gonna take it? Sarah looked at him, at the man who'd shoved her aside, who'd called her incompetent, who'd nearly died because he was too proud to listen, and who was now trusting her with his life because she'd saved it anyway. No, she said. I'm not. Pierce nodded slowly.
Good. Mason turned from the window. We've got company. Sarah stood. How many? 2 vehicles closing fast. Pierce tried to sit up. They found us already, apparently. Torres moved to the door, weapon ready. How do you want to play this? Sarah's mind raced. They were trapped, outgunned, and running out of time. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was the colonel. I'm here, she said. So am I. The colonel's voice was calm. Check your 6. Sarah moved to the back window and looked out. 3 military vehicles, real ones, with unit markings she recognized, were rolling up the valley road. What did you do? She asked. I made a call, the colonel said. And now the people who've been covering this up have a choice. They can keep pushing, or they can back off and let the investigation happen the right way. And if they don't back off, then they explain to a Senate committee why they tried to assassinate a decorated naval officer and silence a witness. The colonel's voice went hard. Your move just became theirs, Brennan, and they don't like the board anymore. The 2 civilian vehicles stopped 100 yards from the house. They didn't advance. Sarah watched as the military convoy positioned itself between the safe house and the threat. It's done, the colonel said. Pierce is protected. The investigation's official now, and the people who wanted him dead just ran out of options. Sarah closed her eyes. Thank you.
You. Don't thank me yet. This gets messy before it gets clean. But you bought him time. That's what matters. The line went dead. Outside, the civilian vehicles turned around and drove away. Pierce was staring at her. What just happened? Justice, Sarah said quietly. Or the beginning of it, anyway. Mason lowered his weapon. Torres exhaled, and for the first time in 3 years, Sarah Brennan felt like maybe, just maybe, the past didn't have to stay buried forever. But as she stood there watching the valley settle back into silence, her phone buzzed one more time. A text, no number. This isn't over. Sarah deleted it. Then she turned back to Pierce and said the only thing that mattered. You're safe now. The rest we'll figure out as we go. He nodded. And somewhere in the distance the sound of rotors echoed across the mountains as reinforcements arrived to make sure the threat stayed gone. The helicopters touched down in a clearing half a mile from the safe house just after noon. Sarah watched through binoculars as a team of 6 emerged. Not FBI, not local law enforcement, but military personnel in unmarked fatigues, moving with the kind of precision that came from operating in places where mistakes were fatal. The colonel had made good on his promise faster than she'd expected. Mason met them at the perimeter. The conversation was brief, professional, and ended with a nod that Sarah recognized as confirmation. They were legitimate. Whatever pressure the colonel had applied, it had worked. Pierce was asleep on the couch, his breathing steadier now, but still shallow. The pain medication Sarah had skewered from the safe house's surprisingly well-stocked medical kit had finally knocked him out. Torres sat in a chair by the door, his weapon within reach, eyes half closed but nowhere near sleep. Sarah's phone rang. The colonel again. They're yours, he said without preamble. Captain Reeves is leading the team, former ranger, solid record, and more importantly, he's not on anyone's payroll except Uncle Sam's. He'll keep Pierce secure while the investigation moves forward. How long is that going to take? Longer than you want. Shorter than it should. The colonel's voice carried the weight of someone who'd fought bureaucracies longer than he'd fought enemies. Naval intelligence is involved now. So is the Inspector General's office. The people who wanted Pierce dead are running out of places to hide. But they're not gone yet. Meaning? Meaning they're going to
Push back hard, and they're going to look for leverage anywhere they can find it. Sarah felt the implications settled. You think they'll come after me? I think you just became a loose end in a conspiracy that's already cost lives. The colonel paused. Sierra 7 is part of this, Brennan. I don't know how deep it goes yet, but your name's in the file. And if someone's pulling threads, they're going to find you. Let them. Don't be stupid. You survived that operation by being smart and careful. Don't throw that away now because you're feeling heroic. Sarah almost laughed. Heroic isn't the word I'd use then. What word would you use? She thought about it, about the way Pierce had looked at her when he woke up, about the salute from Mason and Torres that still felt unearned, about 3 years of keeping her head down and pretending the past didn't exist. Tired, she said finally. I'm tired of running. The colonel was quiet for a moment. Then don't run. But don't make yourself an easy target either. Stay close to Reeves and this team. If things go sideways, they'll keep you breathing long enough for me to fix it.
And if you can't fix it, then we're all in deeper trouble than a phone call can solve. He hung up. Sarah lowered the phone and found Pierce awake watching her. You should be sleeping, she said. Hard to sleep when people keep talking about you like you're a problem that needs solving. His voice was rough, but the edge of pain had dulled. Sierra 7. That's the operation the colonel mentioned. Sarah sat down across from him. Yeah. What happened? Classified. I've got clearance. Had clearance. Sarah corrected. And even if you still did, there's nothing in the official record anymore. It got scrubbed 3 years ago. Pierce shifted, wincing. But you remember every second of it. And it's connected to whoever tried to kill me. Apparently. He studied her face. You're not surprised? No, Sarah admitted. I've been waiting for it to come back. Just didn't think it'd be like this. Like what? Loud. Pierce almost smiled. Then the pain caught up with him, and the expression faded. Tell me about it. About Sierra 7. She shook her head. You don't want that in your head. I've got worse things in my head already. He met her eyes. And if someone's trying to bury us both because of it, I deserve to know why. She wanted to refuse, wanted to keep it locked away where it had been for 3 years, gathering dust and guilt in equal measure. But he was right. He deserved to know.
It was a medical relief operation, she said quietly. At least that's what the paperwork said. We were attached to a forward operating base in a country that doesn't officially exist on deployment rosters. Our job was to provide emergency medical care to local civilians caught in the crossfire of a conflict that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Sounds noble. It was supposed to be. Sarah's jaw tightened. But 6 weeks in, we started seeing patterns. Injuries that didn't match the weapons being used in the area. Chemical burns that suggested exposure to agents that weren't supposed to exist anymore. And patients who disappeared from our care before we could finish treating them. Pierce's expression darkened. Someone was running experiments. Not experiments. Field tests. Sarah's voice went flat. Someone in the chain of command was using the local population as test subjects for weapons that violated about a dozen international treaties. And when we started asking questions, we were told to shut up and do our jobs. But you didn't. No. We didn't. Sarah looked at her hands. We documented everything, took samples, built a case, and then we tried to report it through proper channels. Let me guess. The channels weren't proper. The channels led straight to the people running the operation. Sarah's fingers curled into fists. 3 days after we filed the report, our base got hit. Mortar fire. Small arms. The whole package. We were told it was insurgents, but the attack was too precise, too coordinated. They knew exactly where our medical supplies were, where our personnel bunked, where we'd stored the evidence. Pierce's face had gone hard. How many did you lose? 7. Out of a unit of 12. Sarah's voice didn't shake. It never shook when she talked about this. Shaking would mean feeling it, and feeling it would mean falling. In a park. The 5 of us who survived got pulled out within 48 hours, debriefed, threatened, and told that if we ever spoke about what we'd seen, we'd face charges for violating operational security. And the evidence, destroyed in the attack, or so they said. Sarah looked up. But I kept copies. Digital files. Encrypted. And buried so deep that even I had trouble finding them again. Insurance. In case someone decided that silencing us permanently was easier than keeping us quiet with threats. Pierce was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Where are they now?" "The files." "Safe." That's not an answer.
Only one you're getting until I know who I can trust. He didn't argue. The other 4 survivors, where are they? Sarah's expression went carefully blank. Dead. All of them. Over the past 2 years. Car accidents, muggings gone wrong, one suicide that didn't look anything like suicide when you actually examined the scene? Jesus. Yeah. Sarah stood up, needing to move. I'm the last one left, And the only reason I'm still breathing is because I disappeared so completely that whoever's cleaning house hasn't found me yet. Until now. Until now. The door opened, and Captain Reeves stepped in. He was mid-30s, built like he'd spent his life carrying heavy things up mountains with the kind of calm that came from seeing bad situations and knowing how to handle them. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah. "Commander," a nod to Pierce. "We've secured the perimeter and established a communications link back to command. You're safe here for the time being." "How long is the time being?" Pierce asked. 72 hours, maybe less. After that, we'll need to move you to a more secure location." Reeves's gaze shifted to Sarah. "That includes you, ma'am. Orders are to keep both of you under protection until the investigation's complete." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not military anymore. You can't order me to do anything." "No, ma'am, but I can strongly suggest that staying with us is a better option than going back to Ashton Grove and waiting to see if the people who killed your unit decide to finish the job." He had a point. "Fine," Sarah said. "But I'm not sitting in a safe house for 3 days doing nothing. If I'm stuck here, I'm making myself useful." Reeves almost smiled. "Understood. We've got a field medic on the team, but I'm guessing your experience outranks his." "Probably." "Then consider yourself attached." He turned to Pierce. "Sir, we'll need a full debrief as soon as you're able. Everything you remember about the ambush, the investigation you were running, and anyone you contacted in the 48 hours before the attack." Pierce nodded. "Give me an hour to get my head straight and I'll tell you everything." Reeves left. Sarah looked at Pierce. "You should rest more." "I've rested enough." He sat up slowly, every movement calculated to minimize the pain. "And the sooner we get this done, the sooner we can start putting names to the people who need to pay for what they've done." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that pushing too hard too fast was how you ended up back in surgery or worse. But she
recognized the look in his eyes. She'd worn it herself 3 years ago when she'd realized that the people she trusted had tried to kill her. "All right," she said, "but if you pass out halfway through, I'm telling Reeves to sedate you until tomorrow. Deal?" An hour later, they were seated around a table that had been set up in what used to be the safe house's dining room. Reeves had a laptop open, recording everything. Mason and Torres stood nearby, silent witnesses to a conversation that was about to expose something bigger than any of them had bargained for. Pierce laid it out methodically. The investigation had started 6 months ago when discrepancies appeared in equipment manifests. Weapons and munitions signed out to units that didn't exist, shipped to locations that weren't on any official deployment map. Small things at first, easy to dismiss as clerical errors, but Pierce had a habit of pulling threads when something didn't add up. The threads led to falsified after-action reports, ghost personnel on classified rosters, and financial records that had been scrubbed, but not well enough to hide the patterns. Someone was running black operations off the books, funding them through channels that wouldn't survive scrutiny, and burying anyone who got close to the truth. "I had 3 names," Pierce said. 3 officers high enough in the chain to authorize this kind of operation. I was 48 hours away from presenting my findings to Naval Intelligence when the ambush happened. "Who are the names?" Reeves asked. Pierce told them. Sarah felt her blood go cold. One of the names, Rear Admiral Kenneth Voss, had been the commanding officer overseeing logistics for the region where Sierra 7 operated. "Voss," she said quietly. "He signed off on our deployment orders, and he was the one who pulled us out after the attack." Pierce turned to her. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I saw his signature on the extraction paperwork." Sarah's mind was racing now, connecting pieces that had been scattered for 3 years. If he was running Black Ops in that region, Sierra 7 would have been a perfect cover. Medical relief operation with embedded personnel who could move through civilian populations without drawing attention. And when you started documenting what you found, you became a liability. Pierce finished. "Yeah," Reeves typed rapidly. "If Voss is involved."
Changes everything. He's got enough political cover to bury an investigation if it comes at him directly. We'll need ironclad evidence before anyone moves on this. Sarah stood up. "I can get you evidence. The files you mentioned?" "Yeah." "Where are they?" Sarah hesitated. She'd kept the location secret for 3 years, hadn't even written it down in case someone found her notes. But if Voss was the one pulling strings, if he was the reason her unit died and Pierce nearly followed, then the time for secrets was over. "There's a storage facility in Helena," she said. "Unit 247. Everything's on an encrypted drive in a lockbox under a false name." Reeves looked at her. "How fast can you get there?" 3 hours if we leave now." "Then we leave now." He closed the laptop. "Mason Torres, you're with us. I want eyes on every approach and exits covered at all times." Pierce tried to stand. "I'm coming." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You're staying here. You can barely walk,
and if something goes wrong, I'm not dragging your ass out of another firefight. She's right, sir, Reeves added. You're the primary witness. We can't risk you. Pierce looked like he wanted to argue. Then he saw the expression on Sarah's face and sat back down. Fine, but if you're not back in 6 hours, I'm coming after you. If we're not back in 6 hours, we're already dead, Sarah said, so don't bother. She meant it as a joke. Nobody laughed. They took 2 vehicles, an unmarked SUV and a pickup truck that looked like it belonged to someone who hunted elk for a living. Mason drove the SUV with Sarah in the passenger seat. Torres and Reeves followed in the truck, keeping 100 yards back and watching for tails. The drive to Helena was quiet. Sarah stared out the window at landscape that blurred past, her mind running through contingencies and trying not to think about what would happen if the files weren't there anymore, if someone had found them, if the encryption had failed. You doing okay? Mason asked after an hour of silence. Define okay. Still breathing, not actively bleeding. Haven't shot anyone today. Sarah almost smiled. Then yeah, I'm okay. You know this is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. And you're still doing it. I'm still doing it. Mason nodded. Good. Because if you weren't, I was going to have a hard time explaining to the commander why I let you walk away when you're the only person who can prove he's not crazy. He's not crazy, Sarah said. Just unlucky. Same thing in this line of work. They reached Helena just before sunset. The storage facility was on the industrial edge of town, surrounded by chain-link fence and security cameras that probably hadn't worked in years. Sarah directed Mason to the back entrance, away from the main office, and they parked in a spot that gave them a clear view of anyone approaching. Torres and Reeves pulled in 30 seconds later. How do you want to play this? Reeves asked. I go in alone, Sarah said. Less attention that way. You 3 stay here and watch for anyone who doesn't belong. Not a chance, Mason said immediately. You're not going in there without backup. It's a storage facility, not a combat zone. It wasn't a combat zone 3 years ago either, until it was. Mason's tone left no room for argument. I'm coming with you, non-negotiable.
Sarah looked at Reeves, who nodded. He's right, we don't split up. Not now. She didn't have the energy to fight them. Fine, but we move fast and we don't draw attention. This place has the kind of security that calls the cops first and asks questions never. They moved across the parking lot like they'd done it 100 times before, spread out, heads on a swivel, looking casual but ready. Sarah led them to Unit 247, a 10 by 10 space on the second floor of a building that smelled like mildew and rust. The lock was a combination padlock. Sarah dialed in the numbers, felt the mechanism click, and pulled the door open. The unit was empty, except for a single plastic bin in the back corner. Sarah's heart sank. For a second she thought someone had already been here, already taken it. Then she saw the dust pattern on the floor, undisturbed, except for her own footprints from 3 years ago, and allowed herself to breathe. She opened the bin. The lockbox was still there, scratched and dented but intact. Got it, she said. Mason kept watch at the door while Sarah pulled out the box and entered the secondary combination. The lid popped open. Inside was a thumb drive, small and unremarkable, wrapped in a plastic bag to protect it from moisture. Sarah held it up. This is everything. Medical records, photographic evidence, testimony from the survivors before they died. If Voss is dirty, this proves it. Then let's get it back to the sound of footsteps on the metal stairs outside had cut Mason off mid-sentence. He moved instantly, hand going to his weapon, positioning himself between Sarah and the door. The footsteps stopped just outside the unit. A voice called out, "Brennan, I know you're in there." Sarah recognized the voice. She'd heard it 3 years ago, giving orders that got her friends killed. Admiral Kenneth Voss stepped into view, flanked by 2 men in civilian clothes, with a kind of posture that screamed federal security. He looked older than Sarah remembered, grayer, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and completely devoid of anything resembling remorse. "You've made this very difficult," Voss said calmly. "I was hoping we could resolve this quietly." Sarah's hand tightened on the thumb drive. "Like you resolved Sierra 7. Sierra 7 was an unfortunate accident. You and your team were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We were in the exact place we were ordered to be, doing the exact job you assigned us." Sarah's voice was ice. "And when we found out what you were really doing, you tried to kill us." Voss sighed. "You have no idea what you stumbled into. The work we were doing, what we're still doing, is necessary. It saves lives in the long run, by ending them in the short run, by making hard choices that people like you don't have the clearance with a stomach to understand." Voss stepped forward. Mason's weapon came up. Voss stopped. "Put the gun down, son. You're outnumbered and out of options. I count 3 of you and 3 of us," Mason said. "That's not outnumbered. You're counting wrong." Voss gestured, and 4 more men appeared at the top of the stairs, all armed, all professional. 7 to 3.
and Sarah didn't have a weapon. Voss smiled. Now let's try this again. Give me the drive, Brennan. Walk away. Disappear the way you've been disappearing for 3 years. Nobody else has to die today. Sarah looked at the drive in her hand, looked at Mason, who was calculating angles and odds and coming up short, looked at Voss, who'd killed 7 of her friends and was standing here asking her to let him walk away clean. She thought about Pierce recovering in a safe house and trusting her to come back with the proof he needed. Thought about the colonel who'd put his career on the line to give her a chance. Thought about every person who died because someone decided the truth was too dangerous to survive, and she made a choice. No, she said. Voss's expression hardened. Then you're forcing my hand. The men with him raised their weapons, and Sarah threw the thumb drive as hard as she could out the open door behind Voss, sending it skittering across the metal walkway toward the stairs. Everyone moved at once. Voss lunged for the drive. His security team split, half going after the drive, half staying on Sarah and Mason. And in that moment of chaos, Torres appeared at the top of the stairs with his weapon up, and Reeves right behind him. Federal officers, drop your weapons. Except they weren't federal officers. They were military, operating on orders that probably weren't as official as they should be, and the men with Voss knew it. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then one of Voss's men made a mistake and tried to bring his weapon around toward Reeves. Torres fired. The gunshot echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. The man went down, and everything went to hell. Sarah dove for the floor as bullets started flying.
Mason returned fire, dropping one of Voss's security team before pulling back into the storage unit. Reeves and Torres held the stairs, keeping the reinforcements pinned. Voss scrambled for the thumb drive. Sarah saw him grab it. She didn't think, didn't calculate, just moved. She hit Voss from the side hard enough to knock him off balance. The drive went flying again, bouncing off the railing and disappearing over the edge into the darkness below. Voss shoved her back and ran. "Mason!" Sarah shouted. He turned, saw Voss disappearing down a fire escape on the far side of the building, and swore. "Go, I've got this." Sarah ran after Voss. He had a head start, but he was older, and she'd spent 3 years running from ghosts. She caught up to him at ground level, tackling him into the side of a car hard enough that the alarm went off. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Voss got a hand around her throat. Sarah drove her knee into his ribs, felt something crack, and he let go with a gasp. She rolled away, grabbed a loose piece of rebar from the ground and swung. It connected with Voss's shoulder. He screamed. The gun he'd been reaching for went flying. Sarah kicked it away and stood over him, breathing hard, the rebar still in her hand. "It's over," she said. Voss laughed, wet, pained, but genuine. "You have no idea what you've done. The people I answer to don't stop, they don't quit, and they sure as hell don't forgive. Then I guess we're even." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the cops. Mason appeared at the top of the fire escape. "Brennan, we need to move." Sarah looked at Voss, bleeding and beaten on the pavement, looked at the rebar in her hand. She could end it right now. One swing and nobody would blame her. Instead, she dropped the rebar and ran. They found the thumb drive in the dirt beneath the walkway, scratched but intact. Reeves secured it in an evidence bag while Torres called in their position to whatever higher authority was coordinating this disaster. The cops arrived 4 minutes later. By then, Voss's remaining security team had scattered, and Voss himself was gone, limped away into the industrial maze before backup could lock down the area. Sarah sat in the back of the SUV, her hands shaking from adrenaline crash, and realized that everything had just changed. They had the evidence, but Voss knew they had it.
And whatever protection the colonel had arranged wasn't going to be enough if the people Voss worked for decided that eliminating witnesses was easier than facing justice. Her phone rang. Unknown member. She answered. "You should have taken the deal," Voss's voice said. "Now everyone you care about is a target, starting with Commander Pierce." The line went dead. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Because Pierce was alone in the safe house, with minimal security, and if Voss had people in Helena, he sure as hell had people in Ashton Grove. "We need to get back," she said. "Now." Reeves saw her face and didn't ask questions. "What happened?" Voss just threatened Pierce. They were moving before she finished the sentence. Vehicles screaming back onto the highway, pushing speeds that would get them pulled over in any sane world. Sarah called the safe house. No answer. She called again. Nothing. Mason was driving like he was back in a convoy under fire, weaving through traffic that barely had time to get out of the way. "How long?" Sarah asked. 2 hours if we don't stop. Make it 90 minutes. He pressed the accelerator harder. Sarah tried the safe house number again. This time someone answered, but it wasn't Pierce. It wasn't anyone from Reeves's team. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "Miss Brennan, Commander Pierce is currently unavailable, but he wanted me to let you know he's safe for now." The line went dead before she could respond, and Sarah realized that while they'd been securing evidence, someone had just taken the only witness who could corroborate it. Mason broke every traffic law between Helena and Ashton Grove. Sarah sat rigid in the passenger seat, her phone pressed to her ear as she tried the colonel's number for the 4th time. It rang through to voicemail again. Either he was unreachable or someone had made sure he stayed that way. "Try Pierce's hone," Reeves said from the back seat. Sarah had already tried it twice. She tried again anyway. Straight to voicemail. Not even a ring. "They've jammed communications or pulled the batteries," Torres muttered. "Standard kidnap protocol." "He's not kidnapped," Sarah said. He's leverage. Same thing. No. Kidnapping means they want ransom or concessions. Leverage means they're going to use us to make us do something stupid. Mason glanced at her. Like what? Like trade the evidence for his life. Reeves leaned forward. We can't do that.
I know. Then what's the play? Sarah stared at the darkening highway ahead. Her mind was running scenarios, discarding them as fast as they formed. Every option led to the same conclusion. If they went in direct, Pierce died. If they waited for backup, Pierce died. If they tried to negotiate, Pierce died. And they lost the only proof that could bring Voss down. We need to know where they took him, she said. How? Sarah pulled up her phone's recent calls and found the number that had answered at the safe house. She called it back. It rang once before the same calm voice answered. Miss Brennan, I was expecting you to call sooner. Where is he? Safe, comfortable, and breathing. All conditions that will remain true as long as you cooperate. What do you want? The thumb drive. Uncopied, unexamined, delivered to a location we'll provide within the next 3 hours. And if I don't? Then Commander Pierce's medical condition takes a sudden turn for the worse. Complications from surgery. Tragic, but not uncommon. The voice was so reasonable it made Sarah's skin crawl. You have 2 hours and 58 minutes. I'll send coordinates. The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone and looked at Reeves. They want the drive in 3 hours. Where? They're sending coordinates. Mason's hands tightened on the wheel. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, Sarah's jaw said. But it's the only trap we've got. Reeves pulls out his own phone and made a call that lasted 30 seconds. When he hung up, his expression was grim. I've got a team spinning up out of Fort Carson, but they're minimum 2 hours out, and that's if everything goes perfect. Which it won't, Torres added. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text message with GPS coordinates and nothing else. She pulled up the location on her map app. It's an industrial park, she said, 20 miles east of Ashton Grove. Warehouses and fabrication plants, most of them shut down 5 years ago when the mining contracts dried up. Big area to cover with 4 people. Mason said, We're not covering it with 4 people. Sarah looked at Reeves. How many can you pull from Fort Carson before the deadline? Maybe 6, and that's pushing it. Then we push it. Sarah's mind was working now, turning the problem over like a Rubik's Cube until the solution started showing itself. We don't need to win the fight. We just need to keep them occupied long enough for the real cavalry to arrive. Reeves studied her. You're talking about a delaying action.
I'm talking about making them think they've won right up until the moment they lose. And Pierce stays alive because they need him alive until they have the drive. Once they've got it, he's worthless to them. So we make sure they never actually get it. Torres raised an eyebrow. You want to give them a fake? No, I want to give them the real one, but not the only copy. Sarah turned to Reeves. You've got forensic imaging equipment, right? Something that can clone a drive? Back at base, yeah. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. Sarah checked the time. Then we've got 1 hour and 40 minutes to get back to base, clone the drive, and set up an ambush that doesn't get Pierce killed. Mason was already changing course, angling toward the Fort Carson exit. They made it to the base in 43 minutes. Reeves had called ahead, so the gate guards waved them through without questions. The forensics lab was in a low building that smelled like ozone and burnt coffee. A tech surgeon, who looked about 12 years old, took the thumb drive and disappeared into a back room. Sarah paced while they waited. Mason stood by the window, watching the perimeter. Torres checked his weapon for the 3rd time, and Reeves coordinated with the quick reaction force that was supposed to meet them at the industrial park. We've got a problem, the tech sergeant said, emerging from the back room. His face was pale. Sarah's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? The encryption on this drive is military grade, not standard issue. Someone with serious clearance locked this down, and they didn't want anyone getting in without the right credentials. Can you break it? Maybe, but it'll take time. Hours, probably. We don't have hours. The sergeant hesitated. There's another option. If you've got the decryption key, I can clone the drive as is, and both copies will work. But without the key, I can't even verify what's on here. Sarah closed her eyes. The decryption key. She'd set it 3 years ago, a 32-character alphanumeric string that she'd memorized and never written down because writing it down meant someone could find it. She hadn't thought about it in 3 years. Now she needed to remember it perfectly, or everything fell apart. Give me a second, she said. She walked to the far corner of the room, closed her eyes, and forced herself back to that night 3 years ago. The night before she'd buried the drive in Helena.
She'd been in a motel room in Billings, creating the encryption, choosing a key that would be impossible to guess, but easy for her to remember. She'd used a pattern, coordinates, dates, names. It came back in pieces, then all at once. She walked back to the sergeant and recited the key. He typed it in. The screen blinked. A progress bar appeared. "We're in," he said. "Give me 10 minutes." It took 8. Sarah left the base with 2 identical thumb drives. One went in her pocket. The other went to Reeves, who had strict orders to get it to Naval Intelligence. The second things went sideways. They reached the industrial park with 26 minutes to spare. The coordinates led to a warehouse in the center of the complex, surrounded by empty lots and rusting equipment. 3 entrances, front, side, rear. High windows that would give anyone inside a clear view of anyone approaching. Mason parked 2 blocks away, and they moved in on foot. Reeves' team from Fort Carson hadn't arrived yet. Radio check confirmed they were still 15 minutes out. "We're going in short," Torres said quietly. "I know," Sarah replied. They spread out. Mason took the rear approach. Torres went wide to the east. Reeves and Sarah moved toward the front entrance, using abandoned machinery for cover. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another text. "Come inside alone. Bring the drive." She showed it to Reeves. "Don't," he said immediately. "If I don't, they kill him. If you do, they kill you both. Maybe." Sarah checked her weapon, a sidearm Reeves had given her that she wasn't entirely sure she remembered how to use properly. "But if I can buy 5 minutes, your team gets here and this ends. That's not a plan. That's suicide with extra steps. You have a better idea?" He didn't. Sarah stood up and walked toward the warehouse entrance. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and stepped into darkness that smelled like oil and decay. "Close the door behind you," a voice called from somewhere in the shadows. Sarah closed it. Lights flickered on. Industrial floods that turned the warehouse into a glaring maze of concrete pillars and steel beams. Pierce was in the center of the space, sitting in a chair with his hands zip-tied behind him. He looked like hell, pale, sweating, the surgical wound clearly causing him pain, but he was conscious. 2 men flanked him, both armed, both professionals, and standing behind Pierce, looking perfectly calm, was
Admiral Kenneth Voss. His shoulder was bandaged where Sarah had hit him with the rebar. He favored his left side, but his eyes were clear and sharp. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure you would. You have something I want, and you have something I need." Voss gestured to Pierce. "In exchange, seems fair." Sarah pulled out the thumb drive and held it up. "Let him go first." "No, drive first, then he walks." "That's not how this works." Voss smiled. "Then we're at an impasse." Pierce spoke for the first time. "Don't give it to him, Brennan." One of the guards hit him, not hard enough to knock him out, but hard enough to shut him up. Sarah's hand tightened on the drive. "You see the problem?" Voss said. "You give me the drive, I let him go, and you both walk out of here knowing that everything you fought for disappears. Or you refuse, he dies, and I still get the drive when I search your body. Or option 3, Sarah said, which is the team of special operators surrounding this building right now comes through those doors and you spend the rest of your life in a federal prison." Voss didn't even blink. "You're bluffing, am I?" For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Voss pulled out a phone and made a call. "Status?" A pause. "Understood." He hung up and looked at Sarah. "My people confirm no movement within half a mile of this location, so either your backup is invisible or you're stalling. Maybe both." Voss's expression hardened. "Last chance. Brennan, the drive, now." Sarah looked at Pierce. His eyes were locked on hers and she could see him calculating the same odds she was, the same impossible math that didn't add up to survival no matter how you worked it. She made a decision. She threw the drive. It landed at Voss's feet. He picked it up, examined it, and smiled. "Smart choice. Let him go." "Of course." Voss nodded to his guards. They cut Pierce's restraints and hauled him to his feet. He swayed but stayed upright. "Walk," Voss said. Pierce started toward Sarah. He made it 3 steps before Voss pulled out a pistol and shot him in the back. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Pierce went down hard, his body crumpling like someone had cut his strings. Sarah screamed and moved without thinking, running toward him, not caring about the guns or the guards or anything except getting to him before the warehouse doors exploded inward. Reeves came through the front, Mason through the rear, Torres from the side, and behind them, the Fort Carson teaming.
Full tactical gear, weapons up, shouting commands that turned the warehouse into chaos. Voss's guards opened fire. Sarah hit the ground next to Pierce, her hands already moving to the wound in his back, finding the entry point, applying pressure, even though she knew that a bullet to the spine at this range meant. Pierce coughed blood. "Brennan," he rasped. "Don't talk. Save your strength. Did you give him the real drive?" Yeah, he almost smiled. Good. Then he's got nothing. Sarah stared at him. What? The files? I already sent them. Pierce's breathing was shallow, labored. 2 hours ago, before they took me, encrypted email to Naval Intelligence, Inspector General, Senate Oversight Committee. I'm not an idiot. His hand found hers. The drive was insurance, but the real evidence is already out there. Gunfire rattled overhead. Someone was shouting for a medic. Sarah held Pierce's hand and felt his pulse getting weaker. Stay with me, she said, trying. You don't get to die. Not after everything. Not planning on it. But his eyes were losing focus. Sarah screamed for a medic again and started CPR, her hands moving on autopilot through compressions she'd done 1,000 times in worse conditions than this. Except those times the person dying hadn't been someone who'd insulted her, dismissed her, and then trusted her with his life. Boots pounded toward them. Reeves appeared, then a combat medic with a field kit. Gunshot wound to the thoracic spine. Sarah sang automatically. Entry below T6. No exit. He's in shock. BP's dropping. Pulse is thready. We need evac now or he's gone. The medic took over compressions while Sarah started an IV line with supplies she grabbed from the kit. Somewhere across the warehouse, Voss was screaming orders that nobody was following. Then a single gunshot cut through the noise. Sarah looked up in time to see Voss collapse, the thumb drive still clutched in his hand. Mason stood over him, weapon raised, expression cold. He went for a gun, Mason said flatly. Nobody questioned it. The combat medic got Pierce stabilized enough for transport. They loaded him onto a stretcher and ran for the medevac helicopter that was landing in the parking lot outside. Sarah ran with them, her hands still covered in Pierce's blood, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. They
lifted off 6 minutes after the shooting stopped, and as the warehouse fell away beneath them, Sarah saw federal vehicles swarming the industrial park, saw agents moving in to secure the scene, saw the ending she'd fought for finally taking shape. But Pierce was still unconscious, still bleeding internally despite everything they'd done, still dying even though he'd already won. The helicopter pilot pushed the engines to maximum speed, racing toward Riverside General and a surgical team that was prepping for their arrival. Sarah sat next to the stretcher, holding Pierce's hand, watching the monitors that were screaming warnings she didn't want to hear. "Don't you dare die on me," she said quietly. "Not after all this." Pierce's eyes flickered open, just for a second. "Wasn't planning on giving you the satisfaction," he whispered. Then his eyes closed again, and the flatline alarm started screaming. Sarah's hands
moved before her brain caught up. She ripped open Pierce's shirt, found the defibrillator pads the combat medic had already placed, and charged the unit. Clear. The shock jerked Pierce's body. The monitor stayed flat. Again, another shock. Nothing. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. 2 minutes out. 2 minutes might as well have been 2 hours. Sarah started compressions, counting under her breath, feeling ribs flex under her palms. The combat medic pushed medications through the IV line. Epinephrine, atropine, anything that might restart a heart that had decided it was done. "Come on," Sarah muttered. "Come on, you stubborn bastard." 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Check the monitor. Still flat. The helicopter banked hard, descending toward Riverside General's helipad. Sarah didn't stop compressions, didn't stop even when the skids touched down and the doors flew open and a trauma team swarmed the aircraft. Someone pulled her back. She fought them. "Ma'am, we've got him. Let us work." Sarah stumbled out of the helicopter and watched them wheel Pierce toward the trauma bay at a dead run. Dr. Marcus Calloway was waiting at the doors. He saw Sarah, saw the blood covering her hands and clothes, and for once in his life didn't say anything stupid. The door swung shut behind the gurney. Sarah stood on the helipad, shaking from adrenaline crash, and realized she couldn't feel her hands anymore. Mason appeared beside her. "He's alive." "I don't know." "You got his heart started again?" "No, they did. Maybe. I don't know." Mason guided her toward the entrance. "Come on, you're going into shock." "I'm fine. You're covered in blood and you can't stop shaking. You're not fine." He was right. Sarah let him lead her inside, down the corridor to a waiting room that was too bright and too quiet. Someone gave her a blanket. Someone else tried to give her water. She ignored both. Reeves arrived 10 minutes later, still in tactical gear, his expression grim. "Voss is dead," he said without preamble. "Died at the scene. Single gunshot wound to the chest." Sarah didn't feel anything about that. She probably should have, but all her emotions were tied up in a surgery happening 3 floors above them. "His security team?" she asked. 2 dead, 3 in custody.
They're talking. Turns out loyalty doesn't extend very far when you're facing federal conspiracy charges. In the evidence, the files Pierce sent. Reeves almost smiled. Naval
Intelligence received them 90 minutes ago. They've already started making arrests. Turns out when you send classified evidence of war crimes to 3 different oversight committees simultaneously, people start moving fast. Who else? 2 captains, a colonel, and a civilian contractor with ties to a defense company that's been running black-budget projects for the last decade. Reeves sat down heavily. It's bigger than we thought. Sierra 7 was just one operation. There were at least 4 others in different regions, all using the same playbook, medical relief as cover for weapons testing. Sarah closed her eyes. How many died? We don't know yet, but the number's not small. They sat in silence for a while. Mason paced. Torres appeared with coffee that nobody drank. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, the waiting room doors opened and Dr. Calloway stepped through, still in surgical scrubs, looking exhausted. Sarah stood up so fast she almost fell over. Calloway pulled down his mask. He's alive. Sarah's knees went weak. Mason caught her arm. The bullet severed the T7 nerve root and nicked the descending aorta. Calloway continued. We spent 3 hours repairing vascular damage and stabilizing the spinal injury. He lost a lot of blood, and the neurological damage is significant. How significant? Calloway's expression was careful. He'll live, but there's a strong possibility he won't walk again. The spinal cord trauma was severe. We won't know the full extent until the swelling goes down, but early indicators suggest complete paralysis below the waist. Sarah heard the words but couldn't process them. Pierce, the man who'd walked into the ER under his own power, who'd shoved her aside, who'd nearly died twice in 24 hours, might spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Can I see him? She asked. He's in recovery, still sedated, but yes, just you though, and only for a few minutes. Sarah followed Calloway through corridors she'd walked 1,000 times, but had never felt this long. They took an elevator to the surgical ICU, a floor reserved for patients who weren't stable enough for regular rooms, but weren't critical enough for full intensive care. Pice was in a private room at the end of the hall. Monitors beeped steadily. IV lines ran from both arms. A ventilator breathed for him, the tube down his throat ensuring his lungs kept working even if his body wanted to quit. Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. His face was gray, peaceful in a
way that only heavy sedation could manage. The wound dressing covered most of his back. She could see the edges of it where the hospital gown didn't quite cover. "You did it," she said quietly. "The files are out. The arrest started. Voss is dead. It's over." Pierce didn't respond. Couldn't respond. "I'm sorry about your legs. I'm sorry I couldn't." She stopped. Because apologizing to an unconscious man was pointless, and because the guilt sitting in her chest wasn't something that could be fixed with words. She stayed for 10 minutes. Then a nurse came in and politely suggested she get some rest. Sarah left the room and found Reeves waiting in the hallway. "We need to talk," he said. They found an empty consultation room. Reeves closed the door and turned to face her. "The Inspector General wants a full statement," he said. "Everything about Sierra 7. Everything you documented. Everything you know about the other operations." "When?" "Tomorrow. They're sending investigators from DC." Reeves paused. "They also want to restore your military record. Officially acknowledge what happened. Clear your name." Sarah had waited 3 years to hear those words. Now that they were here, they felt hollow. "What about the others?" she asked. "The 7 who died." "They're reviewing the after-action reports. If the evidence supports it, and it will, they'll posthumously restore their honors and issue formal apologies to the families." "Apologies?" Sarah's voice was flat. "For murdering them, and then pretending it was an accident? It's not enough. I know that, but it's something." Sarah looked at her hands. Pierce's blood had dried under her fingernails. "I want their names read into the congressional record. I want everyone who died because of Sierra 7 acknowledged publicly, not buried in classified files where nobody will ever see them. I'll make sure it happens. And I want the people who gave the orders prosecuted, not just Voss, everyone above him who knew what was happening and let it continue." Reeves's expression was grim. "That's going to be harder. Chain of command in black operations gets murky. Plausible deniability is built into the system.
Then tear the system apart until there's no place left to hide. I'll do what I can. It wasn't a promise, but it was close enough. Sarah left the hospital just before dawn.
Mason insisted on driving her home. She fell asleep in the passenger seat and woke up in her apartment parking lot with no memory of the drive. "Get some rest," Mason said. "We'll handle the debrief prep." Sarah nodded and climbed out. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Small, sparse, impersonal. She'd lived here for 8 months, and it still looked like a hotel room. No pictures on the walls, no personal items except what fit in a single duffel bag. She showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing Pierce's blood from under her nails, and trying not to think about how close he'd come to dying. Trying not to think about the fact that he'd trusted her and she'd led him straight into a bullet. She collapsed into bed, still wet, and didn't dream. The knock on her door came 6 hours later. Sarah answered it to find a woman in a Navy suit with a government ID clipped to her belt. "Ms. Brennan, I'm Special Agent Carolyn Wade, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I need you to come with me." Sarah's stomach dropped. "Why?" "Because there's been a development, and you need to see it before anyone else does." Wade drove her to a federal building in downtown Ashton Grove that Sarah had passed 100 times but never entered. They took an elevator to the 4th floor and walked down a corridor lined with closed doors and blank walls. Wade stopped at a conference room and pushed it open. Inside were 3 people Sarah didn't recognize, and one she did. The colonel sat at the head of the table, looking older than he had the last time she'd seen him, but no less dangerous. "Brennan," he said, "sit down." Sarah sat. Wade took a position by the door. The other 3, 2 men and a woman, all in suits that screamed federal authority, watched Sarah with expressions that gave nothing away. The colonel slid a tablet across the table. "This arrived at Naval Intelligence 2 hours ago. Encrypted communication from an anonymous source. It took them 90 minutes to crack it." Sarah picked up the tablet. The screen showed a video file. She pressed play. The video was grainy, clearly shot on a phone or hidden camera. It showed Rear Admiral Voss in what looked like a private office talking to someone off screen. "Don't care what it takes," Voss was saying. "The Brennan woman has files that could unravel everything. She needs to disappear permanently, and I want it
Done before she makes contact with anyone who matters." The person off-screen responded, but the audio was too distorted to make out words. Voss continued, "I already authorized the Sierra 7 cleanup. 7 targets eliminated over 18 months. 1 left. I'm not letting 3 years of work fall apart because we got sloppy at the end." Sarah's blood went cold. The video cut to another scene. Same office, different day. Voss was on the phone. "Pierce is getting too close. If he presents his findings to intelligence, we're done. I need him neutralized before the end of the week." Another cut. Another conversation. "The ambush is set. He won't survive the extraction." The video ended. Sarah sat down the tablet with shaking hands. The colonel spoke first. "That video is authenticated. Timestamps match phone records and location data. It's admissible evidence in a federal prosecution." "Voss is dead," Sarah said. "Yes, but the investigation doesn't die with him." The colonel gestured to the 3 others at the table. "This is Assistant Director Marcus Hale from the FBI, Deputy Inspector General Rachel Ortiz, and Captain Lawrence Kim from Naval Intelligence. They're leading the joint task force investigating the conspiracy." Hale leaned forward. "Ms. Brennan, that video confirms what we suspected but couldn't prove. Admiral Voss orchestrated the elimination of Sierra 7 survivors and attempted to assassinate Commander Pierce to prevent exposure of illegal weapons testing programs. But he didn't act alone. We have evidence of at least 6 co-conspirators still active in military and civilian positions." "Who sent the video?" Sarah asked. "We don't know yet," Ortiz said. "But whoever it was had access to Voss's private communications and waited until after his death to release them. That suggests someone inside his network who wanted insurance or revenge." Captain Kim spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried weight. "The video also mentions authorization codes for black budget allocations. We've traced those codes to 3 senior officials, 2 in the Defense Department, 1 in a private defense contractor. All 3 are currently under surveillance." Sarah processed that. "You're going to arrest them. We're going to build cases that are airtight," Hale corrected. "Arrests happen when we're certain nothing falls apart in court. These people have resources, connections, and lawyers who specialize in making evidence disappear. We can't afford mistakes." "How long?"
Weeks? Maybe a month? Sarah stood up. "A month? People are dying. More operations like Sierra 7 could be happening right now while you're building your case." "We've already shut down 4 active programs," Ortiz said firmly. "Personnel have been reassigned, operations suspended, and oversight committees briefed. The immediate threat is contained." "Contained isn't stopped." "No," the colonel agreed, "but it's better than letting them scatter before we can secure convictions." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to demand immediate action, consequences, justice delivered with the same speed and violence that had been used against her unit. But she'd been in the military long enough to know how this worked. Slow, methodical, built to survive appeals and political pressure. She sat back down. Hale slid a document across the table. We need your formal cooperation. Full deposition on Sierra 7, identification of personnel involved, and testimony when this goes to trial. You'll have it. We also need the original files, the ones you encrypted and stored in Helena. Sarah looked at the colonel. He nodded slightly. Reeves has them, she said. He can provide copies. We'll need chain of custody documentation, Ortiz added. Defense attorneys will attack any gap in the evidence trail. We need to prove these files haven't been tampered with since you created them. They haven't. We'll still need to prove it. The meeting lasted another hour. By the end, Sarah had signed 6 different documents, agreed to 3 separate depositions, and accepted that the next several months of her life would be spent reliving the worst parts of her past in conference rooms and courtrooms. When it finally ended, the colonel walked her out. You did good, he said once they were alone in the hallway. Pice got shot. Pice is alive, and the conspiracy that tried to kill him is falling apart. The colonel stopped walking and turned to face her. I know it doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But what you did, what you both did, is going to save lives. The programs are shut down. The people responsible are going to face consequences. That matters. Tell that to the 7 people who didn't make it out of Sierra 7. I will, when their names get read into the congressional record and their families finally learn the truth. The colonel's expression softened. You kept your promise, Brennan. You made sure they weren't forgotten. That's worth something. Sarah wanted to believe that. Wasn't sure she could. She went back to Riverside General. Pierce had been moved out of recovery and into a private room. He was awake now, the ventilator removed, breathing on his own. His eyes tracked her as she entered. Hey, he said. His voice was rough from the breathing tube. Hey yourself. I'm told I got shot. You did, and that you kept me alive long enough to get here. Someone had to. Pierce shifted slightly and winced. They also told me I might not walk again. Sarah pulled a chair close. The swelling hasn't gone down yet. They won't know the full extent of the damage for another few days. But it's bad. Yeah, it's bad. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Did the files make it out? Yeah. Arrests started this morning. More coming. Voss dead? Mason shot him at the warehouse. Pierce nodded slowly. Good. They sat in silence. The monitors beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. I'm sorry, Sarah said finally. For what? For getting you shot. Pierce's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. Pretty sure Voss gets credit for that part. I should have... You should have what? Refused to help? Let me die in the ER when I was too proud to listen? Pierce's eyes locked on hers. You saved my life twice, Brennan. Once when I was bleeding out, and once when you made sure the evidence got where it needed to go. I'm the one who should be apologizing. For what? For calling you just a nurse? For acting like you didn't know what you were doing? For being an arrogant ass who almost got us both killed because I was too stubborn to trust the person who actually had the answers? Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Pierce continued. I looked into your record, or what's left of it anyway, the parts that weren't classified or erased. You ran medical operations in places where the supplies didn't show up and the backup never came. You kept people alive who shouldn't have survived. And when your own command tried to silence you, you disappeared rather than backing down. I ran. You survived. There's a difference. Pierce's expression was serious. Now, what you did, documenting Sierra 7, keeping the evidence safe, staying alive long enough to use it, that took more courage than anything I've done in 20 years of service. And I'm sorry I didn't see that when you were standing in front of me trying to save my life. Sarah's throat was tight.
You were bleeding out. I'll give you a pass on bedside manner. I don't want a pass. I want you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm grateful. The words hung in the air between them. Finally, Sarah said, So what happens now for you? I mean, Pice looked at his legs. Medical discharge, probably. Disability benefits, maybe a desk job if I'm lucky and the Navy decides they still want me. You want a desk job? No. But I want to finish what I started, and if I can do that from a wheelchair, I will. Sarah believed him. She stayed for another 20 minutes until a nurse came in and told her visiting hours were over. Pierce was asleep before she left, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Sarah walked out of the hospital and found Mason waiting by his truck. Figured you could use a ride, he said.
I can walk. I know, but you don't have to. She climbed in. They drove through Ashton Grove as the sun set behind the mountains. The town looked the same as it always did. Quiet, unremarkable. The kind of place where nothing important ever happened, except everything important had happened here. What are you going to do now? Mason asked. I don't know. Testify, give depositions, try to put the pieces back together. You going to stay in Ashton Grove? Sarah thought about that. About her tiny apartment with no pictures on the walls. About working night shifts at a hospital where half the staff still didn't know her name. About 3 years of hiding in plain sight. I don't know, she said again. Mason nodded. Well, when you figure it out, let me know. Torres and I could use someone like you on our team. Your team does what exactly? Classified. Sarah almost laughed. Of course it is. They pulled up to her apartment. Mason handed her a card with a phone number on it. That's my direct line. You need anything, and I mean anything, you call. Understood. Understood. She got out and watched him drive away. Inside, her phone was ringing. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Brennan? Miss Brennan? This is Dr. Calloway. Sarah's heart dropped. What's wrong? Is Pierce? Commander Pierce is fine, stable. But something came up during post-surgical review. Calloway paused. We found something in the imaging we took after the shooting. Something that wasn't caused by the bullet. What kind of something? I'd rather explain in person. Can you come back to the hospital? I just left. I know, but this is important. Sarah turned around and started walking back.
She found Calloway in his office, a series of X-rays and CT scans spread across his desk. What am I looking at? She asked. Calloway pointed to a dark mass on one of the scans. It's in Commander Pierce's upper thoracic region, just below where the bullet entered. Sarah leaned closer. The mass was small but distinct, with irregular borders. That's a tumor, Calloway said quietly. We ran additional imaging to confirm. It's malignant. Stage 3, possibly stage 4, and based on the growth pattern, it's been there for at least 6 months. Sarah's mind went blank. He didn't know? She asked. There's no indication in his medical records that he was ever screened for it, and the symptoms, fatigue, back pain, weight loss, he probably attributed to stress from the investigation. Can you treat it? Calloway's expression was carefully neutral. We can try, but given the location and the spinal damage from the gunshot wound, surgery isn't an option. That leaves radiation and chemotherapy, and even with aggressive treatment, the prognosis isn't good. How not good? 12 to 18 months, maybe less if it's already metastasized. Sarah sat down hard. Pierce had survived an ambush, 2 near-death experiences, and a bullet to the spine. He'd exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. He'd sacrificed his ability to walk to make sure the truth came out, and now he was dying anyway. Does he know? Sarah asked. Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? Because you're listed as his emergency contact, and because I thought you'd want to be there when I tell him. Sarah closed her eyes. When? Tomorrow morning, once he's strong enough to process the information. She nodded. Calloway handed her the scans. Take these. Review them if you want, and if you have any questions before tomorrow, I won't. Sarah left the office and walked through the hospital corridors on autopilot. Her mind was trying to process too many things at once, and failing at all of them. She made it to the parking lot before her phone rang again. The colonel. We've got a problem, he said without preamble. Another one? The anonymous source who sent the video of Voss. We identified them. Who? Captain Lawrence Kim, Naval Intelligence. He was sitting in the conference room with you this morning. Sarah's blood went cold. He's one of the investigators? Was one of the investigators. Turns out he was also Voss's second-in-command for the Black Operations Program.
Colonel's voice was grim. He sent the video to buy credibility, get himself embedded in the investigation so he could control what we found and what we didn't. Where is he now? Gone. Disappeared 6 hours ago, along with classified files on every active investigation into the conspiracy. Sarah leaned against her car. He's going to destroy the evidence, or use it as leverage. Either way, we just lost our best chance at prosecuting the people at the top of this thing. What do you need from me? I need you to remember everything Kim said in that meeting, every question he asked, every detail he seemed interested in. Because if he's running, he's got a plan, and the only way we stop him is by figuring out what it is before he executes it. Sarah closed her eyes and forced herself back into the conference room, back through every word,
every gesture, every... She stopped. He asked about the original files, she said. The ones I stored in Helena. He wanted to know about chain of custody. So he was the only one who asked specifically about the originals. Everyone else was fine with copies. Sarah's mind was racing now. He wanted to know where they were because the copies Reeves has aren't enough. If Kim
Can destroy the originals, he can claim the copies were fabricated. The originals are secured. Reeves has them locked down. Are you sure? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the colonel swore. I'll call you back, he said, and the line went dead. Sarah stood in the parking lot watching the sun disappear behind the mountains and realized that the conspiracy she thought was falling apart was still very much alive, and the man leading it had just walked out the door with everything he needed to make sure it stayed buried forever. Sarah's phone rang 90 seconds later. The colonel's voice was tight. Reeves was hit 20 minutes ago, armed assault on the secure facility where he was holding the original files. 3 men, professional, in and out in under 4 minutes. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. Is he alive? Barely. He's in surgery now, but the files are gone. Kim has to be. He knew exactly where to look and when to hit. Someone on the inside fed him intel. Sarah closed her eyes and forced herself to think past the rage building in her chest. The copies still exist, the ones Naval Intelligence already has. Kim's lawyers will argue they're fabricated. Without the originals to authenticate against, the defense tears them apart in court. We lose the prosecution before it even starts. The colonel paused. We need those files back, Brennan, and we need them before Kim disappears with them. Where would he go? If I knew that, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Sarah's mind ran through possibilities. Kim had resources, connections, and a head start, but he also had a problem. The files were encrypted with the same 32-character key Sarah had used 3 years ago. Kim could steal the drive, but he couldn't access the contents without that key, which meant he needed her. He's going to try to make contact, Sarah said. What? The encryption. He can't break it without the key, and the only person who knows it is me, so either he tries to force me to give it up or... Her phone buzzed, another call coming in. Unknown number. Hold on, she told the colonel and switched lines. Brennan. Miss Brennan. The voice was calm, familiar. Captain Lawrence Kim. I imagine you've heard about the unfortunate incident involving Captain Reeves. Sarah's hand tightened until her knuckles went white. Where is he? Receiving excellent medical care, I'm sure, unlike the 7 members of your unit who weren't given that. Courtesy. What do you want? The encryption key. You give it to me, I disappear, and the investigation collapses quietly. Nobody else gets hurt. Nobody else has to die. And if I refuse, then Commander Pierce's cancer treatment gets significantly more complicated. Hospital systems are surprisingly easy to access when you know the right people. Medication errors happen all the time. Sarah's blood went cold. You're threatening a dying man. I'm offering you a choice. The key, or you watch everyone around you suffer until you give it to me anyway. Kim's voice stayed perfectly reasonable. You've already lost, Brennan. The originals are gone. The copies are worthless without authentication, and every person who could corroborate your story is either dead, in surgery, or paralyzed in a hospital bed. There's no version of this where you win. There's a version where you go to prison. No, there isn't. Kim paused. You have 2 hours to decide. I'll call back with instructions. The line went dead. Sarah switched back to the colonel. Kim just made contact. What did he want? The encryption key in exchange for disappearing quietly. You can't give it to him. I know. Then what's the play? Sarah looked at the hospital behind her, at the building where Pierce was recovering from a gunshot wound and facing a cancer diagnosis he didn't know about yet, where Reeves was fighting for his life after taking a bullet meant to protect evidence, where 7 people had died 3 years ago and their names still hadn't been cleared. I give him what he wants, she said. Brennan, but not the way he expects. Sarah's mind was working now, turning the problem over until it started showing her edges she could use. Kim needs the key to access the files, but he doesn't know what's in them, not really. He knows their evidence against Foss and the conspiracy, but he hasn't seen the actual contents. So what if the files he stole aren't the only copies? What if there's another set he doesn't know about? The colonel was quiet for a moment. You made a backup. 3 years ago, yeah, before I encrypted the originals. The backup's on a different drive, different location, no encryption.
Sarah started walking toward her car. Kim gets the key, accesses the files, thinks he's won. Meanwhile, we use the backup to build the case he thinks he just destroyed. Where's the backup? My apartment, hidden in a place nobody would think to look.
People watching your place. Then I'll have to be careful. Sarah drove home with her eyes on the rearview mirror, watching for tails. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean they weren't there. She parked 2 blocks away and approached her building on foot, using alleys and side streets she'd mapped out 8 months ago when she first moved in. Old habits from a life spent looking over her shoulder. The apartment was dark. She didn't turn on the lights. The backup drive was hidden inside a hollowed-out medical textbook on her bookshelf, the kind of hiding place that worked because nobody expected a combat nurse to keep her most valuable evidence inside a book about battlefield trauma care. She pulled it out and slipped it into her pocket. Her phone rang. Kim again. "Time's up," he said. "Where do you want to meet?" "I don't." "Then Pierce." "You're not going to touch Pierce, because if anything happens to him, I destroy the key and you're left with an encrypted drive you can't access in a conspiracy that stays buried forever." Sarah kept her voice steady. "You need me alive and cooperative, so here's how this works. I give you the key remotely, you verify it works, then you disappear and I never hear from you again." Kim was silent for a moment. "How do I know you won't give me a fake key?" "Because I'm tired. I'm tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of watching people die. You want to walk away clean? Fine. Take the files and go. I just want this to be over." Another pause. Sarah could almost hear him calculating, weighing the risk. "All right," Kim said finally. "Send the key to this number as a text message. When I confirm it works, we're done. And Pierce? Untouched. You have my word." Sarah almost laughed. The word of a man who'd orchestrated murders and stolen evidence. But she didn't need his word. She just needed him to believe he'd won. She recited the encryption key from memory, 32 characters she'd never written down and never forgotten. Kim's end went quiet as he verified it. "It works," he said after a minute. "Pleasure doing business with you, Miss Brennan." The line went dead. Sarah waited 10 seconds, then called the colonel. "He has the key," she said. "And he thinks he's won. Did you give him the real one?" "Yeah. But he's about to find out that winning isn't the same as getting away with it." 20 minutes later, Sarah walked into a federal building in Ashton Grove.
With the backup drive in her hand and Mason at her side, the colonel was waiting with Assistant Director Hale and a forensic team that looked like they hadn't slept in days. Sarah handed over the drive. "This is everything from Sierra 7, she said. "Medical records, photographs, testimony, communications logs, unencrypted. The same content that's on the stolen drive, but accessible without the key Kim just got from me." Hale took the drive carefully, like it might explode. "You've had this the whole time?" "Insurance policy. I didn't trust anyone enough to mention it until now." The forensic team disappeared into a back room. Sarah sat down and waited. 30 minutes later, they confirmed it. Every file on the backup matched the encrypted originals. Chain of custody would be harder to establish, but the content was identical and the metadata supported Sarah's timeline. "This works," Hale said. "We can rebuild the case." "Good," Sarah said. "Now we need to find Kim before he realizes what just happened." The colonel pulled out his phone, already on it. The moment Kim accessed the stolen files, he triggered a tracer we embedded in the encryption. "We've got his location." "Where?" "Private airfield outside Helena. He's got a plane fueling up right now." Sarah stood. "Then we need to move. We're already moving." The colonel gestured to Mason and Torres, who'd appeared in the doorway. "Federal marshals are en route, but they're 20 minutes out, and Kim's flight plan says he's wheels up in 15. Sarah looked at Mason. "How fast can you drive?" "Fast enough." They took 2 vehicles. Mason drove like he was being chased instead of doing the chasing, pushing his truck to speeds that made Sarah grip the door handle. Torres followed in the second vehicle with a tactical team that had been on standby since Reeves' hack shot. The airfield appeared through the darkness, a single runway, a few hangars, and a small jet sitting on the tarmac with its engines warming up. Mason killed the lights and coasted to a stop at 100 yards out. Sarah could see Kim through the jet's windows, moving around the cabin, alone, confident, already counting his victory. "Marshals are 5 minutes out," Torres said over the radio. "We wait for them or we go now." Sarah looked at Mason. "Your call." Mason checked his weapon. "We go now.
If that plane takes off, Kim's gone, and we're starting from zero.
Using the darkness and the engine noise to cover their approach, Sarah stayed back while Mason and Torres positioned themselves at the jet's entrance. Kim appeared at the door carrying a bag that probably held the stolen files. He saw them and froze. "Captain Kim," Mason called out, "step away from the aircraft slowly." Kim's hand moved toward his waistband. "Don't," Torres said. His weapon was up, steady. "We've got 3 rifles on you right now. You don't walk away from this." Kim's hand stopped. He looked at Sarah, standing 20 feet away in the shadows. "You gave me the key," he said. "I did. So what's this?" "This is what happens when you assume you're the smartest person in the room." Sarah stepped into the light. "You got the key, you accessed the files, and now we have proof you stole classified evidence and fled the country to avoid prosecution. Congratulations. You just committed 3 federal felonies on camera." Kim's expression went from confident to cornered in the space of a heartbeat. "The plane's fueling station has security cameras," Sarah continued. "So does the hangar, and the tracker in the stolen drive recorded every movement you made since you took it from Reeves. You wanted to destroy the evidence. All you did was create more." Federal marshals pulled onto the tarmac, lights flashing. Kim looked at the plane behind him, then at the vehicles blocking his escape, then back at Sarah. "You could have let me walk," he said. "Given me the fake key, let me disappear. Nobody would have known. I'd have known," Sarah said. "And 7 people who died because of you deserved better than watching their murderer walk away clean." Kim went for his weapon. Mason shot him before he cleared the holster. The bullet took Kim in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the tarmac. The marshal swarmed in, weapons drawn, securing the scene while Sarah stood back and watched justice arrive in the form of handcuffs and Miranda rights. Kim was screaming about lawyers and rights and conspiracy. Nobody cared. The lead marshal recovered the stolen drive from Kim's bag and handed it to Hale, who'd arrived in the convoy. Hale checked the contents, confirmed it matched Sarah's backup, and nodded. "We've got him," Hale said. "Theft of classified materials, obstruction of justice, attempted murder of a federal officer, and about 6 other charges that'll keep him locked up until he's too old."
Remember his own name. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, but close. Mason appeared at her side. "You good?" "Getting there." Reeves pulled through surgery. "He's stable." That helped. They drove back to Ashton Grove as dawn broke over the mountains. Sarah's phone rang. The colonel. "It's done," he said. "Kim's in custody. The files are secured, and Naval Intelligence just executed arrest warrants on the remaining co-conspirators. By this time tomorrow, everyone involved in Sierra 7 and the Black Operations Program will be facing federal charges." "What about the families?" "The 7 who died. The Inspector General is drafting official letters, full disclosure of what happened, formal apologies, and restoration of military honors. It'll be public record by the end of the week." Sarah closed her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You did this. You kept the evidence safe. You stayed alive when people wanted you dead, and you made sure the truth came out." The colonel paused. "Your service records being restored too. Full reinstatement of rank, back pay for the 3 years you were in limbo, and official recognition for what you did." "I don't want recognition." "Too best. You earned it." The call ended. Sarah went back to Riverside General and found Pierce awake, propped up in bed, looking exhausted but alert. "I heard Kim's in custody," he said. "Yeah, and that you're the one who caught him. Mason shot him. I just set the trap." Pierce almost smiled. "Sounds like I missed a good story." Sarah sat down. "You've got a better one. You exposed a conspiracy, survived an assassination attempt, and made sure the evidence got where it needed to go. That's going to matter to a lot of people. It would matter more if I could walk. Maybe. But you're alive. That's not nothing." Pierce was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Calloway told me about the cancer." Sarah's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. Don't be. I've had a good run. Better than most." Pierce looked at his hands. "I just wish I had more time to see this through. Make sure the prosecutions stick. Make sure the families get answers. You will. 12 to 18 months isn't enough. Then we make it enough." Sarah leaned forward. "You fight. You do the treatment. You keep breathing. And you make every day count for something." Pierce met her eyes. "Is that what you did for 3 years?" "Yeah." "Did it work?"
Sarah thought about the night she'd spent looking over her shoulder, the jobs she'd taken that were beneath her training, the way she'd buried herself so deep that she almost forgot who she was. "I survived," she said. "That's all I could manage at the time. But it turns out surviving is enough. As long as you're still here, you've got a chance to make things right." Pice nodded slowly. "Then I guess I better start fighting." They sat together for a while, not talking, just existing in the space where 2 people who'd barely survived the same nightmare could finally breathe. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of a Senate Oversight Committee and testified for 6 hours about Sierra 7.
the Black Operations Program, and every detail of the conspiracy that had tried to silence her. The room was packed with press, families of the fallen, and officials who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She told the truth, all of it. No sugarcoating, no political language, just the raw facts of what had happened and who was responsible. When she finished, the committee chairman, a gray-haired senator from Virginia, looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Ms. Brennan, on behalf of this committee and the United States government, I want to apologize for what was done to you and your unit. What happened was unconscionable, and I give you my word that everyone responsible will face the full consequences of their actions." Sarah nodded. Words were cheap, but the prosecutions had already started, and the convictions would follow. That mattered more than apologies. After the hearing, she walked out of the Capitol building into crisp D.C. winter air and found Mason waiting by a car. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Like pulling teeth, but it's done." "Good, because I've got someone who wants to talk to you." He opened the car door. Inside was the colonel, looking older and more tired than Sarah had ever seen him. "Get in," the colonel said. Sarah climbed into the back seat. The car pulled away from the curb. "The Navy wants to reinstate you," the colonel said without preamble. "Full rank, full benefits, assignment to a combat medical training unit at Fort Benning. They'll even backdate your pay to cover the 3 years you were out." Sarah stared out the window at the monument sliding past. "And if I say no, then you say no. Nobody's going to force you back into uniform."
The colonel turned to look at her. "But I think you should consider it. You're good at what you do, Brennan, better than most. And there are people out there who need that skill set. I'm tired of watching people die. Then teach people how to keep them alive. Train the next generation of combat medics. Make sure what happened to your unit doesn't happen to anyone else." Sarah thought about that. About going back to the life she'd left behind. About wearing the uniform again, carrying the rank, accepting the responsibility. About finally stopping running. "I'll think about it," she said. The colonel nodded. "That's all I'm asking." 2 months after the testimony, Sarah stood in Arlington National Cemetery, watching 7 flag-draped caskets being laid to rest with full military honors. The families were there, parents, siblings, children who'd grown up without knowing why their loved ones had really died. Now they knew. The names were read aloud, ranks restored, medals awarded posthumously. And when it was over, Sarah stood alone at the graves and finally let herself feel the weight of 3 years she'd spent carrying their memory. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I made sure they knew. I made sure everyone knew." The wind carried her words away. She turned and found Pierce sitting in a wheelchair at the edge of the cemetery, Mason standing beside him. Pierce had started treatment 2 weeks ago. The prognosis hadn't improved, but he'd stopped asking about timelines and started focusing on what he could still do, which, it turned out, was a lot. He'd been working with naval intelligence, providing testimony, and helping build cases against the remaining conspirators. The cancer was winning, but it was winning slowly, and every day Pierce stayed alive was another day the people responsible had to face consequences. Sarah walked over to him. "You came," she said. "Wouldn't miss it." Pierce looked at the graves. They deserved this. Yeah, they did. They stood together in silence for a while. Then Pierce said, "I heard you're going back in. Training assignment at Benning. Word travels fast. Small world, smaller Navy." Pierce smiled slightly. "You're going to be good at it. Teaching? Giving people a reason to keep fighting when everything's going to hell? You're good at that." Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Pierce continued, "I'm putting in for a desk assignment, Investigations Division. Figure if I'm stuck in this."
Chair, might as well use the time to make sure cases like this don't get buried again. You should be resting. I'll rest when I'm dead. Until then, I've got work to do. Sarah understood that. A month later, she reported to Fort Benning and discovered that teaching combat medicine to 18-year-old recruits was harder than actually practicing it in war zones. The recruits were eager but terrified, overconfident but underprepared, and utterly convinced they were immortal. Sarah's job was to fix that without breaking them. She was good at it. 6 months into the assignment, she got a call from Pierce. His voice was weaker than she remembered, but still sharp. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "Final convictions came through yesterday. Everyone involved in Sierra 7 and the Black Ops program is going to prison, minimum 25 years, most of them looking at life." Sarah sat down.
really over. The legal part is. Pierce coughed, and Sarah heard the wetness in it that meant the cancer was progressing. The rest we carry with us. But at least we don't carry it alone anymore. No, we don't. I'm proud of you, Brennan, for what it's worth. It's worth a lot. Good. Because I don't say it often. Pierce paused. I need to go. Treatment starts in 20 minutes, and the nurses here are terrifying. Sarah almost laughed. Take care of yourself, Commander. You too, Sergeant. The call ended. 3 months later, Sarah stood at Pierce's funeral and watched another flag-draped casket being lowered into the ground. He'd lasted 14 months after the diagnosis, 2 months longer than the doctors predicted, and he'd used every single day to make sure the conspirators stayed behind bars and the truth stayed public. Mason and Torres were there, along with half the Naval Intelligence Division and more officers than Sarah could count. The eulogy called Pierce a hero, a patriot, and a man who'd sacrificed everything for justice. Sarah thought he would have hated the attention, but appreciated the accuracy. After the service, Mason approached her. He left you something, Mason said, handing her an envelope. Sarah opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with Pierce's handwriting. Brennan, if you're reading this, I'm dead. And you're probably at my funeral feeling guilty about things that weren't your fault. Stop it. You saved my life twice, and gave me enough time to finish what I started. That's more than I deserved. And
Exactly what I needed. I'm leaving you my investigation files. Everything I compiled on corruption, conspiracy, and criminals who think they're untouchable. There's enough there to keep you busy for years if you want it. Or you can burn it all and move on with your life. Your choice. Either way. Thank you for seeing me when I was too arrogant to see myself, for keeping me alive when I didn't deserve it, and for making sure the people we lost weren't forgotten. You're a better person than you think you are. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise, Pierce. Sarah folded the letter and put it in her pocket. That night, she sat in her quarters at Fort Benning and opened the files Pierce had left her. Hundreds of pages of evidence, testimony, and leads on cases that spanned decades and touched every branch of the military. It was too much for one person, but then again, she wasn't one person anymore. She called Mason, then Torres, then the colonel, then a dozen other people she'd met over the past year. Investigators, prosecutors, whistleblowers who'd been silenced and were looking for a way back into the fight. By the time the sun came up, she had the framework for something bigger than any single case. A network
of people dedicated to making sure what happened to Sierra 7 never happened again, to exposing corruption before it cost lives, to protecting the people who spoke truth even when it was dangerous. It wasn't an official organization, didn't have a budget or a charter or even a name, but it had Sarah and Mason and Torres, and a growing list of people who were tired of watching injustice hide behind classifications and plausible deniability. It was enough. 5 years later, Sarah stood in front of a new class of combat medic trainees at Fort Benning and looked at faces that reminded her of her own 2 decades ago, young, scared, trying to hide it behind bravado and bad jokes. "You're here because you want to save lives," she told them. "That's good. That's important. But it's not enough, because sooner or later, you're going to be in a situation where saving lives means standing up to someone with more rank, more authority, and more power than you have, and you're going to have a choice." She paused, making sure they were listening. "You can stay quiet, follow orders, keep your head down, and hope someone else speaks up. Or you can do what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs you everything, even when nobody believes you, and everyone tells you to back off." One of the recruits raised a hand. "What if we're wrong?" "Then you're wrong," Sarah said. "But at least you tried. At least you didn't let fear make your decisions for you." Another recruit spoke up. "Did you ever have to make that choice?" Sarah thought about a warehouse in Montana, about a nurse who'd been dismissed, and a commander who'd been dying, about 7 people buried in Arlington, and a conspiracy that reached the Pentagon. "Yeah," she said, "I did." "What happened?" "I lost everything I thought mattered, and I gained everything that actually did."
The recruits didn't fully understand. They wouldn't until they faced their own impossible choices. But someday they would. And when they did, Sarah would make sure they weren't alone. After class, she walked across base to the medical training center and found Mason waiting outside her office. "We've got another one," he said, handing her a file. Sarah opened it. Evidence of medical malpractice being covered up at a VA hospital. Whistleblower silenced. Patients dying while administrators buried reports. Different players, same pattern. "What do you need from me?" Sarah
asked. "What do you do best? Find the truth. Make noise. Don't let them bury it." Sarah looked at the file, then at Mason, then at the recruits filing asked on their way to the next class. She thought about everything it had cost to get here, about the people she'd lost and the ones she'd saved, about the nurse who'd been dismissed as irrelevant, and the sergeant who'd refused to stay silent. "All right," she said, "let's get to work. Because that's what you did when you'd survived the impossible. You made sure the next person facing it didn't have to do it alone. You stood up when others stayed silent. You fought when fighting cost everything. And you never ever let anyone tell you that you didn't belong in the fight." Sarah Brennan had spent 3 years hiding from her past. Now she spent every day making sure the future was better than what came before. And somewhere in Arlington National Cemetery, 7 names carved in stone stood as proof that the truth, once spoken, could never be silenced again. The woman they dismissed as just a nurse had made sure of that. And she wasn't done yet.